topic today. Just the connection between food and nutrition. I'll disclose that I am a little bit sleep deprived. I think that that's kind of the nature of working in higher ed sometimes, right? But this is a really great opportunity for us to learn some information today that is really going to give us some building blocks and some foundational steps and really just some simple implementation of things, whether it's reducing the amount of foods that inhibit our sleep quality or increasing the amount of foods that can really enhance that sleep quality. Okay, perfect. And if y'all don't mind, Miranda, will you confirm for me, does everything look okay on the user end with the slides?
Yes,
Okay,
looks good.
perfect. I always like to make sure that that's
Yeah,
taken
looks
care
good.
of on the front end. Wonderful. So with our learner objectives today, we do want to identify some sleep promoting and sleep hindering foods and nutrients. I want you to be able to get familiar with these, maybe even more familiar if a lot of the things that I'm mentioning today are things that you have heard about, but maybe provide a little bit more context as to why they may help or hinder our sleep. And then also understanding that connection between nutrition and sleep. We may not have ever actively thought about that connection together. So, really want to dive into that. And then also to describe the side effects of lack of sleep. I think that we've all experienced sleep deprivation before. We know how it affects our performance, but really, how does it affect us internally at the cellular level? So, why is sleep so important? Again, we know that we need it for best energy levels, we need it for cognitive function, but we may not always think about it from the disease prevention standpoint. And just even thinking about it in regards to being as essential as food and water. Whenever I am talking to our students, especially with our department primarily serving students as our target population, when we think about high stress times in our life, if we're busy academically, I often ask students what tends to be on the back burner for us. And so and usually the options are we putting movement on the back burner? Are we putting rest on the back burner? Are we putting nutrition on the back burner? And all three of those things are going to be so important for their academic performance. But it can be so easy for sleep to be one of the options that we put on the back burner, right? And especially for us as professionals. And so I really want us to take a deep dive into that right now, talking about what is adequate sleep. What does that look like for us, depending on what age and stage of life that we are in? So as I started preparing content for this presentation, I was starting to look at some of the data that's out there, and the CDC's behavioral risk factor surveillance system really looks at sleep from U.S. adults. So for those 18 years of age and older, and so the percentage of adults who do not get enough sleep is really going to vary by where they live and their sex, age, and race and ethnicity. And so as we look at this map, I had to kind of chuckle when I saw that Alabama was in one of the higher percentage ranges. And so when we look at Alabama specifically, it's actually 41.4%. And so when individuals are indicating that they do not get adequate sleep, we're really we are defining this by someone getting at least 7 hours of sleep a day. So for those saying that they don't get enough, they're reporting that they get less than this. And so, I want us to keep this in the back of our mind as we talk about the things that contribute to poor sleep quality and inability to sleep effectively. So just thinking about the lifestyle of Alabamians, where we are in these percentages, and some of these correlations, I thought it would be fun to really make that connection. So as far as sleep throughout the lifespan, changes happen. depending on where we are in our life as far as how much sleep we need. So, as we age, the amount of time that we spend sleeping is going to both decline and also becomes more consolidated. So, as you can see here, depending on where we are in the lifespan, for newborns, that's going to be anywhere between 16 to 20 hours. For more of that infancy stage of 4 to 11 months, 12 to 15. Children aged 1 to 4, closer to 11 to 12. And that doesn't necessarily have to be consistent. That's why we do have built-in naps, through daycare or any other environment. Usually it's not necessarily going to be 11 to 12 hours overnight. And then for adolescents, it's going to be closer to 9 hours. And then for adults, and I would assume most of us in this Zoom, that's going to be 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night is going to be the ideal range. So let's talk a little bit about sleep cycles and the different sleep stages. And so when we think about what a sleep cycle is, that is going to include all five of the different sleep stages, and that's going to last anywhere between 90 to 110 minutes, and we'll go through multiple sleep cycles in a night. And so when we think about stage one, this is going to be your lightest stage of sleep. Your brain wave frequencies are only slightly slower than when a person is awake, and breathing is going to be at a more normal rate. So, this is going to be your first 5 to 10 minutes after you've dozed off. When we get into stage two, this is going to be a deeper level of sleep with those sawtooth brain waves. And the sleeping individual is going to be a little bit more difficult to wake up at this point. And so this is going to last anywhere between 10 to 25 minutes in that sleep cycle. Within stage three, this is going to be a deep sleep. What happens here is actually really neat because this is where a lot of your bone and muscle growth occur, and the body repairs tissues and strengthens the immune system. It's going to be really difficult to wake up someone in this state, and when they're awakened, the person's going to be pretty disoriented. You may or may not have been woken up by somebody while you have been in this stage of sleep. And usually, this stage is going to last anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes. When we start thinking about stage four and five, which is also going to include REM sleep, this is going to occur about 90 minutes after falling asleep. Our heart rate and our breathing become faster. Our brain is the most active at this point. This is usually when dreaming happens. And so in that first cycle of your sleep cycle, this REM stage may only last 10 minutes, and then later phases can actually last a bit longer, maybe even up to an hour. So it's kind of nice to know what happens in our sleep. I think this is going to provide a lot of context as we talk about how food is affecting our sleep quality throughout the night. So, in terms of, sleep and insomnia, I think it's important for us to define what exactly insomnia is. What is that prevalence? So, really, anywhere between 10 to 30% of adults live with some form of insomnia. So, there's chronic insomnia. And so, what that is going to look like is that's going to be the individual who's reporting having trouble sleeping at least 3 times per week for the last 3 months. Short-term insomnia is going to last less than 3 months. And when we think about the types of insomnia that are involved, there's sleep onset, which is difficulty falling asleep. There's also sleep maintenance, and that's going to be that difficulty staying asleep throughout the night. And then there's also mixed. So that's going to be that combination of both sleep onset insomnia as well as sleep maintenance insomnia. My husband has returned to police work, now working at UAPD, and had rejoined police work about a year ago. So had joined last summer and is doing an overnight shift. And so, when I've been collecting information for today's presentation, it has been fascinating because I've been watching how his sleep quality has declined and, getting to label the different forms of sleep insomnia that he has. So this has been extremely helpful for me to see that. So, when we think about insomnia, some common habits that can cause or perpetuate insomnia include lying in bed awake for more than 15 to 20 minutes when you're having trouble sleeping, maybe making drastic changes to the usual sleep schedule. Again, as I mentioned, my husband and having a completely different change in work schedule, type of work that he's doing, maybe doing activities or tasks in bed that aren't conducive to sleep, napping for long periods during the day or taking multiple naps can contribute to insomnia during the times that we should be sleeping those longer periods. And then also drinking alcohol close to bedtime. We're going to dive even more into alcohol a little bit later on because I think sometimes there can be some confusion there because I'll have individuals say, well, actually, alcohol helps me fall asleep. And so we're going to talk even more about how alcohol is specifically contributing to insomnia. And I appreciate some of you reacting to what I have on the screen as far as the photo, because this is sometimes me. It's like, oh man, I'm going to go to bed early tonight. I finally got my kids in bed. And then here I am laying in my bed late at night, and I am Googling or thinking of the most random things. Maybe I'm not Googling if ghosts have teeth, but I'm thinking about some child actor from a show that I watched in the early 90s, and whether or not they're still in show business or what they look like, or who knows what it could be. But I'm glad I could get a couple of chuckles from y'all, and maybe some of those sentiments from that image resonate with you. Okay. So, as we think about sleep deprivation in the body and side effects of lack of sleep, so aside from what we tend to just feel throughout the day and it being very obvious in terms of, kind of having a slowed reaction time, feeling irritable, feeling tired, just not with it, I want to talk about some different components in regards to side effects of sleep. So, first, when we're thinking about obesity and metabolic disease, we're looking at increased levels of ghrelin, decreased levels of leptin. And so numerous studies show that we're more likely to make less healthy food choices and eat larger quantities of food when our brains and our bodies are sleep deprived. So I think that that's important to note. And, you may have experienced that personally, or maybe you've observed that in other individuals. And the reason for this is because of that imbalance of those appetite hormones, leptin and ghrelin. So ghrelin is what we consider to be our hunger hormone. So we're getting an increase in that. Leptin is really going to be that hormone that really helps regulate our appetite. And so when we have that sleep deprivation, those hormones certainly go out of whack. So with sleep deprivation, we're going to have increased cravings for calorie dense carbohydrate foods, sweets, and salty snacks. When we think about this from the vantage point of insulin sensitivity and diabetes, cells are going to become less receptive to insulin in sleep deprived individuals. Low blood sugar levels while sleeping can lead to a stimulation in the release of adrenaline and cortisol. And so that's going to promote awakening. And you may not have realized that before. When we're experiencing those jumps in our blood sugar, there's metabolic processes that are going on, and that can certainly wake us up during the night or really disrupt that sleep quality. And so now, research is indicating that chronic sleep deprivation has been recognized as one of the major contributors to the rise of type 2 diabetes in most first world countries. And so I think that is important for us to note. From a cardiovascular disease perspective and also with immune health, first I'll just say with immune health, there is a bi-directional relationship between sleep and immune system health. So sleep can really strengthen our immune memory, including the ability to remember how to recognize and react to dangerous antigens. People who typically get or chronically get less than 6 hours of sleep are more than 4 times as likely to become ill after exposure to the flu virus. I wanted to make sure that I pointed this out as we enter flu season and we have our flu shot campaign on campus. And so, the more that we are deprived, the more likely we are going to be to viruses, and specifically the flu virus. From cardiovascular disease, so our cortisol levels are going to increase at night when our sleep quality is poor, and your body's going to remain stuck in this degree of flight or flight. So this is really going to prevent the body from entering deep restorative stages of sleep where the heart and the blood pressure are lowered. When we think about mental health, when we're sleep deprived, we have increased stress and anxiety. Again, release of cortisol and adrenaline from those adrenal glands, irritable, poor memory. There's also research indicating that lack of sleep can increase the risk for Alzheimer's disease. There was a recent study conducted by the NIH, excuse me, and it was found that beta amyloid, a protein waste product that builds up in the fluid between brain neurons, increases during sleep deprivation. And so the buildup of beta amyloid has been linked to Alzheimer's disease and the formation of plaques on neurons in the brain. And this study found that even after one night of poor sleep, beta amyloid deposits increased by 5%. So again, found that to be very interesting and wanted to share that as part of today's presentation. So, when we think about really prioritizing sleep for our overall health, when we're thinking about what we need to be working on in terms of improving our overall well being, it can be very easy to just focus on nutrition or maybe just focus on the movement piece. But sleep is going to be part of that as well. All of these are going to be so important as we think about affecting our physical health, our mental health, and it is important to note that a perfectly balanced diet can only do so much for the body without adequate sleep. And same thing goes, if you are consistently physically active but you're lacking in the other areas, that's going to be problematic. And if we're lacking in sleep, that's going to be problematic for the other areas. There's a very symbiotic relationship between sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And so just think about it. Poor sleep, it's going to lead to poor eating habits. And then, poor diet may negatively impact your motivation to work out. So, when we're sleep deprived, do we have the motivation to go work out before or after work? And then, if we only had a few nights or a few hours to sleep the night before, it's going to be very likely that we're grabbing that second, third, or fourth cup of coffee, and then we're getting in all that caffeine, and that's eventually going to disrupt our sleep quality the following evening. And it's very much a cyclical effect. And this may be something that you're experiencing and trying to get out of that rut because you've been in that rut for so long. So when we start thinking about sleep hygiene, this is really going to refer to having both a bedroom environment and daily routines that promote consistent, uninterrupted sleep. So, as we start thinking about the bedroom environment, we'll mention that a little bit later on in the presentation. But when we think about daily routines, this is also going to include the type of nutrients that we're consuming as well as limiting. So, when we start thinking about the connection between food and rest, food is going to be responsible for fueling everything that our body does during the day as well as when we're asleep. If you take a look at the 2020 through 2025 guidelines for Americans and what's been indicated in terms of those nutrients that we have a lot of deficiencies in as Americans, the most concerning underconsumed nutrients are going to be calcium, potassium, vitamin D, and fiber. And three out of these four nutrients really do play an important role in getting a good night's sleep. And that's going to be your potassium, calcium, and vitamin D. So, some nutrients and compounds we do want to consider for sleep, and I'll be going a little bit more in depth today, is going to be magnesium. We'll be talking about potassium, vitamin B6, as well as calcium, vitamin D, tryptophan, and melatonin. And we're going to go much deeper into just talking about tryptophan being into turkey and thinking about some more practical things and about some other nutrients that are associated with better sleep quality. I feel like magnesium in particular has has been mentioned a lot, especially as we hear about different sleep supplements that are out there that do not contain melatonin. So, part of that conversation is magnesium. And so, really, with magnesium, it is going to be helpful to our sleep in a variety of ways. For one, it's going to be promoting relaxation, it's going to help relax our muscles, it's going to calm our nervous system by regulating neurotransmitters like GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid. And so this is going to really reduce our neuronal excitability. It's going to promote relaxation. It's going to make it easier for us to fall asleep. And low magnesium levels can actually lead to reduced GABA production, and that can lead to an increase in anxiety and sleep difficulties. Magnesium is also going to help enhance our sleep quality. And so that is really helpful. It's going to aid in our sleep, reducing stress, inflammation, relaxation of muscles. And so when we think about the sources that are out there, nuts and seeds, avocado, leafy green vegetables, and yogurt, certainly an additional option would be to take a supplement. But as a dietitian, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I think it can be more helpful to actually get these nutrients from actual foods. And that's not to say don't ever take a supplemental version of this, but I think sometimes it's fun to know what we can naturally add to our diet as part of our normal meals and snacks that are going to contain these key nutrients. Another nutrient to think about is going to be potassium. That's really going to help with our blood flow, muscle contraction, and prevention of muscle cramps. I don't know how many of you get muscle cramps throughout the night. I know I consistently get woken up by having cramps in my calves. Part of that, I think, is correlated to the fact that I'm on a diuretic as part of a combo of blood pressure medications. So that does really contribute to me cramping a little bit more consistently. Having potassium in your diet can help with that. And so we know sources such as banana, tomatoes, spinach, sweet potatoes, yogurt, and milk can be really helpful, and they're great sources of potassium. Next is going to be vitamin B6. This is important for production of serotonin and melatonin. And sources of this are going to include chickpeas, yellowfin tuna, halibut, lean beef, bananas, and pistachios. That's just one of many sources, but wanted to kind of include some that may be part of your regular diet. So, additional nutrients that we want to think about, calcium. So, this is going to really help our body use tryptophan to manufacture melatonin and nervous system function. So, our sources for calcium, in addition to taking calcium supplement, is going to be your milk, yogurt products, so those dairy products, and then sardines and canned salmon. I know you want to be snacking on that throughout the day. Got to tell you about it because those are great sources of calcium, as well as almonds. And so, as we think about tryptophan and melatonin, we hear that a lot when we think about sleep. So, just jumping down to tryptophan really quick. The reason tryptophan is important is because it is a precursor to serotonin production, which leads to melatonin production. And some sources are going to be meats, dairy, poultry, seafood, eggs, nuts, and seeds. And then vitamin D is going to be important for mood regulation and immune function. And so we're going to be getting this from salmon, sardines, egg yolks, and fortified foods. So a lot of times you'll notice with milk, there's vitamin D fortified milk that is available. And I think I see something in the chat. I want to check that really quick. Someone's mentioning they can't hear me. Do I have anyone else experiencing audio issues? Let me know. I always like to check the chat so that we can troubleshoot. Are we good?
I'm able to hear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Miranda. Okay. So next, I want to talk a little bit about melatonin. Melatonin is something that we hear about pretty frequently when we think about sleep. And melatonin is a natural hormone that is found in our body. It regulates our sleep-wake cycle, but it's also found in certain foods. So this is going to include tart cherries, pistachios, almonds, tomatoes, and eggs. And so while a synthetic form of melatonin can be beneficial legal and safe for most adults when used on a short-term basis, there's going to be side effects if it's used for an extended period of time. So really ideally, when we start thinking about taking a melatonin supplement, because I think sometimes it can be easy to consider that when we haven't been sleeping very well, you want to start with a low dose. So that's going to be anywhere between a half to 1 milligram and then increase gradually as needed. If we're going with a higher dose, so 5 milligrams and above, that's really going to be unnecessary and it may lead to some symptoms we don't want to experience, like excessive grogginess. And then there's also reports of correlations with vivid dreams. You can drop in the chat if you've ever had a bad experience with taking a melatonin supplement and having some weird dreams. I know anecdotally from talking to colleagues that they've had those experiences. And also, too, we want to take melatonin at the right time. So you want to take it anywhere between a half hour to an hour before your desired bedtime. It's going to really help regulate your body's internal clock. And you want to use this for specific situations. And so, we don't want to get in a habit of taking it daily, and it just being kind of one of many things that we take as, like a multivitamin. We don't want it to be that kind of situation. I've actually had some of our university students ask me about the safety and efficacy of that, but that's not necessarily what we want to use it for. So if we're thinking about taking a melatonin supplement, you want to use it in a strategic situation. So one very practical situation could be jet lag. So if you're traveling across time zones, melatonin can really help reset your sleep and wake cycle. Also, too, for those that are in shift work, it can assist those working irregular hours to adjust to a non-traditional sleep time. Again, the ideal situation is that they are not relying on it the rest of the time, that they are working shift work for the rest of their life. That can be an issue. But also, too, we have individuals who their doctor may recommend using it for insomnia or delayed sleep phase syndrome, DSPS. And that's really going to help people who struggle to fall asleep at regular hours. So there could be a time and place for longer use, but I really would consult with your physician about that. And again, the ideal situation here would be to get it from actual food sources. So if you haven't bought cherries in a while, or cherry juice, and you want a good excuse to do that, this is a great situation to do that, as well as pistachios and almonds, tomatoes and eggs. And when we think about the bioactivities of melatonin, it's anti-inflammatory, it's going to help with immune support, antioxidant activity, it's neuroprotective. There's also that cardiovascular protection as well. So it's nice to know all of the different ways that melatonin can be beneficial for us. And again, I would emphasize getting this from actual food sources and then using the melatonin supplement in more strategic situations. When we think about herbs and herbal tea, we've all seen our sleepy time tea with the bear that has its little cup of tea in its PJs in the recliner. And so for chamomile in particular, it has been used for centuries as a sleep inducer and anxiety reducer. Apigenin, which is an antioxidant, is thought to be responsible for the calming effects, which is in within chamomile. Lavender may help with sleep, depression, and anxiety. There's not really been any significant studies on lavender tea and sleep, but I did want to mention its correlation with the potential for really helping with sleep and relaxation. And yes, for those of you who are asking if I'll be able to share the presentation, I'm definitely happy to share the slides. You can email me. I'll put my email in the chat to get that out so you have a PDF copy, and then I know we'll have this recording. Oops. Okay, so other herbs and herbal tea. So peppermint. So peppermint can be great, contains menthol, which can really help relax the muscles, ease upset stomach, and alleviate tension. Works as a decongestant, excuse me. But one thing we do want to keep in mind is that for those with gastroesophageal reflux disease, may not benefit from this type of tea because it actually can make that reflux worse, and will have, painful inability to sleep there. There's also something called valerian root. It is reported to help fight insomnia and decrease anxiety by calming the central nervous system. So you may see some valerian root teas that are out there. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere like Manna Grocery in town had it. I've actually tried it before. It smells awful. Like it's just, or at least awful to me. But I've heard other people say that it has a funky smell. But apparently, it's on the rise as an herb that's been recognized to really help with sleep quality. So if you're okay with the funky smell and you want to try it out, that's something to consider. Okay, so we talked about some different nutrients that we want to consider for really enhancing our sleep quality. Now let's start to focus on those things that we want to avoid. So, caffeine. Goodness, I feel bad saying anything about caffeine when we work at an institution of higher ed, and caffeine can get many of us throughout the day. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that yes, caffeine can be helpful with improving our short-term memory and our performance and our reaction times when we haven't had a good night's sleep. But we want to be careful about this because caffeine, in the sense of affecting sleep quality and our ability to fall asleep, it's going to affect everyone differently. So generally, a half life is going to be 6 hours. The quarter life of caffeine is going to be 12 hours. And the way that caffeine can be problematic is that it is going to work by blocking adenosine, and that is a neurotransmitter that builds up in our brain throughout the day, and that promotes sleepiness. And so when that's blocked, the caffeine increases alertness and reduces the feeling of fatigue, making it harder to fall asleep. And obviously, during the day, when we have that big meeting or whatever we're working on, we want to feel that way, right? But as we're starting to wind down, that can be an issue. And so when we start thinking about trying to fall asleep at night, um, I think a good rule of thumb would be to try to consider stopping caffeine anywhere between 8 to 14 hours before bedtime, depending on your own known sensitivity to caffeine. Maybe your window does not need to be as large. I know many colleagues on campus and even students who, will try really hard not to have some form of caffeine after 2 p.m., especially if they have a goal bedtime in mind. And so, another recommendation to this when we think about overall milligrams of caffeine to take throughout the day is going to be around 400 milligrams a day. So, if we're thinking about the different types of beverages that are out there, depending on the type of coffee we're drinking, there's going to be variations in how much caffeine is in a cup of coffee versus a shot of espresso or whatever else. I know for things like a Celsius or an Alani energy drink, many of those out there, it's like around 200 milligrams. And so that's something that we do want to keep in mind. And also, if we're used to using these kind of products before a workout, maybe we think about what time we're going to work out. Are we going to work out right after work? And then as a little pick me up because we didn't sleep so well the night before and we actually want to work out really well and have those energy levels, we decide to drink a Celsius that's in the cooler at the gym. It sounds great in that moment, but it's going to affect your sleep quality later that evening. And again, drop in the chat if that's ever applied to you. That's certainly applied to me. So during those times that I haven't been able to make it to a morning workout and I end up choosing to work out in the afternoon, it sounds good in the moment to drink that energy drink, but then I don't necessarily think about the consequences of later that evening. Okay, let's talk a little bit about alcohol. So the thing about alcohol, it's going to cause that drowsiness that can make it easy to initially fall asleep. But when we're really thinking about your overall sleep cycle and sleep quality, it's going to really affect us being able to reach the deep restorative stages of sleep. One thing that's happening here is it's going to deplete our body's magnesium stores in the bones and muscles. And so if we end up having a magnesium deficiency over time, that can be linked to insomnia, depression, and anxiety. It can also worsen sleep apnea symptoms and snoring. And of course, that's affecting sleep quality. And again, I'm going to acknowledge, it does initially act as a sedative. It's going to make us drowsy, but as it starts to metabolize, it's going to cause those sleep disturbances, and we're going to be waking up frequently throughout the night. So this is really going to be disrupting our natural sleep cycle. Alcohol is also going to play a role in reducing our body's melatonin production too. It's going to suppress our body's natural ability to be able to produce the amount of melatonin we need to wind down and actually fall asleep. So we want to keep that in mind. It's going to be affecting our REM sleep. And also, it can impair relaxation. Alcohol is going to raise our heart rate. It's going to increase dehydration, and that's going to make it harder for the body to achieve a relaxed state needed for sleep, even if we have melatonin. So, a big thing here, too, is we don't want to mix alcohol and melatonin. I'm not saying that any of us on this presentation do that, but if that's ever crossed your mind of like, oh, let me have a little glass of wine, let me take my melatonin, that's actually not necessarily going to be helpful. So do want to just explicitly say that. Okay, checking my time, making sure I'm good. Okay, so also we want to limit reflux-inducing foods, especially for those of us who have chronic issues with acid reflux. But high-fat foods, acidic foods, spicy foods. The reason that this is going to affect our sleep quality is because we're getting that stimulation of stomach acid, and so that loosening of the esophageal sphincter is going to increase the chance of heartburn, and that's going to interfere with our ability to sleep. So, as we think about recommendations for our slate for ourselves, maybe we're taking a walk after dinner to aid with digestion. Getting that blood flow throughout the body that's really going to help make that digestion a little bit more efficient. And then also, too, maybe limiting these foods or reducing the portion sizes, especially at an evening meal. So, again, this is not saying don't ever eat these foods. Just know that they could contribute to your ability to fall asleep or stay asleep. And then, maybe we adjust the time of what time we eat these foods and the portion size before bed. Even within that same vein, big meals for us as Americans, we tend to eat our most significant amount of calories in the evening. I know with other cultures, lunch can be the biggest meal of the day, but for us as Americans, I think just with society and lifestyle, dinner tends to be our most significant meal. And so when we think about why this can be problematic, this can raise concerns with indigestion and then again, acid reflux. And so if the body is working hard to digest your food, it's going to be really hard for your body to fall asleep just because your body is increasing that metabolic rate, your body temperature, and that's going to interfere with getting in deep sleep or REM sleep. And again, hey, we've all been there where we've had to eat really late and then, immediately fall asleep because of the circumstances of our day. But if there can be a little bit more of a buffer time between when we have that heavy meal and when we go to bed, so our body has adequate time to digest that food, that can be really helpful. And so, one other thing that we can think about when we are having that dinner meal is really engage in some mindful eating. It takes anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes for the brain and stomach to communicate and actually provide that sensation of fullness. A lot of times, though, we end up eating so fast that within the first 5 minutes of eating, we may have already consumed the volume of food it takes for our stomach to be full. But because brain and stomach haven't had a chance to talk to each other yet, we keep nibbling and nibbling. And then finally, 30 minutes later, that fullness hits us and we're over full. So if you're not sure, what your pace of eating is, I would really encourage you to use your cell phone next time at dinner, maybe even tonight, maybe during your lunch break, and time yourself to see how long it normally takes you to consume a meal and if you're a rapid paced eater or not. If you do find yourself eating on the faster side, one very easy technique is something as simple as just putting down the fork in between each bite of food. It sounds so silly and so dumb, but if you're anything like me, I do have the habit of already having my next bite of food locked and loaded, ready to go, waiting right outside my mouth when I haven't even finished business with that first initial bite of food, right? So, we can take a bite of food, set our fork down, chew, swallow, make sure our mouth is completely cleaned out, maybe take a sip of water or other beverage, and then physically scoop up that next bite of food. That's going to create some natural pauses in there. You can be a little bit more mindful in that experience, really kind of check in with yourself. Hey, does this food still continually taste great as I progress through this meal? Am I satisfied? And then finding a level of fullness that you're just full and satisfied and comfortable and not necessarily over full. We don't want to eat to a point where we're still hungry and we're just trying to leave food on our plate. But I think there's definitely a neutral feeling that we can achieve where we're no longer hungry, but we are full and satisfied. It's just not uncomfortable fullness. Also, refined carbohydrates and sugar. And as a non-diet dietitian and one that practices intuitive eating, I will say this does not mean don't ever eat sugar, don't ever eat refined carbohydrates, don't ever have candy. Not saying this at all, but in regards to sleep quality, we want to think about the consumption of these products and these types of foods close to bedtime. So, when these foods raise our blood sugar levels while we're asleep, we have an increase in our insulin. Again, possibly the adrenaline and cortisol release that's happening that we talked a little bit earlier on. So that could cause some sleep disruptions, waking up hot or with night sweats as our blood sugar is kind of all over the place. And chronically high insulin levels over time can lead to that poor insulin sensitivity. So we do want to keep that in mind. So if we're thinking about what we would want to do instead, we would want to plan to choose more complex carbohydrates and avoid snacking on some of these high sugar or refined carbohydrate foods and beverages, especially close to bedtime. Okay. Dehydration. We do want to make sure that we're staying adequately hydrated to really enhance our sleep experience. So we don't want to experience dehydration because that can affect our sleep quality. We do need adequate hydration for the quality of our sleep. That's going to really help with cellular function. It also, when we think about dehydration, that's going to increase sleep disruptive snoring due to dry mouth and nasal passages. Maybe you've been that person, maybe you've been in the same bedroom with that person. And it can also, again, increase the risk of muscle cramping. And so, if we're having muscle cramping in the middle of the night, that could wake us up. So, my recommendation would be making sure we are staying adequately hydrated. We're drinking water throughout the day, but also eating water rich foods. So, in the summertime, during those warmer months, it feels very natural for us to get a lot of fresh fruits, some vegetables, eating salads. As we get into these colder months, we're going to be having soups. And so, there's going to be some natural liquid that's there too. And, when we think about urine color and really being able to gauge if we're adequately hydrated, doing checking for a urine color that's either clear or pale yellow can be ideal. Also, the body will sometimes mimic the feeling of hunger as an initial sign of dehydration. So if you've just eaten a meal or you've just eaten a snack, during the day, and about 30 minutes later, an hour later, you're already feeling hungry again. Before going to eat something else, I like to do a water check, and that's where you would drink a glass or bottle of water, wait about 5 to 10 minutes, and then reassess that hunger feeling. If that water got rid of that hunger sensation, it might have been more of a hydration issue than a hunger issue. But if you are still hungry, even after drinking that water, you may have not eaten enough at that previous meal or snack. So, what's nice if we are on top of our water intake, if we're a novice fluid drinker, um, Initially starting with 64 ounces. My ideal situation for most of us, barring any medical issues, would be around 100 ounces a day or more, especially when we're in our more hot, humid months. And so when we're on top of that water intake, we don't have to second guess if our body is legitimately hungry or not when we feel those hunger sensations, because we can at least rule out the dehydration piece because we are doing so well with that. When we start to think about some non-dietary approaches to better sleep, so again, when we think about overall sleep hygiene, there's some other things that we can implement here. So, one thing is going to be managing our stress. So, breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, even aromatherapy, anything to get us in a relaxed state can be really helpful. So, if we have different sleep routines that can really help our body know, oh, we're about to wind down for the day, this can be a great implementation there. So, having some form of these stress management techniques close to bedtime can be part of that routine. And then also regular exercise. There is a bidirectional relationship between exercise and sleep. After 4 months of increased activity, people who previously reported insomnia were able to sleep 1 hour more a night. So there is that correlation that's there. Um, and the recommendation is for that movement to be at least 3 hours before bed. Um, Again, this is different for everyone. The general recommendation is that you don't want to be physically active so close to bedtime if you can help it, because that can disrupt sleep quality. But I know many people, including our faculty staff and our student friends, who will go to the rec center or wherever else late at night, go work out, and then go to bed. For others, they could never fathom themselves doing that because they know that that would keep them up at night. But certainly, if we can make sure that movement is part of our day, and I'm not saying we have to hit the gym and do something that's this formal, strenuous thing. I think just any kind of joyful movement. We're taking a walk around the quad with our lunch buddy. We're catching up on, all the things. Doing that, anything to get our heart rate. When we think about exercise, I think sometimes it's so easy to just correlate it with weight management. But, we want to think about the fact that we're increasing circulation, it's increasing our endorphins. We want to think about all the other positive benefits of physical movement, and that's also going to include enhancing our sleep quality. Some other non-dietary approaches to better sleep, when we just think about trying to manage our circadian rhythm as a whole, um, aiming for getting at least 20 minutes of sun exposure in the morning, because hello, we're going to naturally be getting some vitamin D synthesis from that too, from being outside and getting that sun exposure. So, having exposure to natural light for a certain length of time during the day, that's going to be really helpful for our circadian rhythm. Another thing that's going to be helpful to this is if we can really get in a habit of having a consistent bedtime and wake time, even on the weekends. I know easier said than done. That is probably not ideal for most of us. If it is something that you could see as an opportunity for implementing, I would say try it out because that could be very helpful for regulating your circadian rhythm. And then when we think again about sleep hygiene and creating an appropriate sleep environment, we want that to be a relaxing sleep environment. So we want to try to limit our artificial lights and technology an hour before bedtime. Many of us, including myself, are used to kind of looking at our phone even just seconds or milliseconds before um, going into sleep, or deciding we're going to like turn the lights off and go to bed. But really, if we can make sure that that's not happening right before bedtime, would be ideal. And then also trying to make your bedroom a peaceful environment, free of clutter if possible, so that you can truly relax both mentally and physically. And then also having a cool bedroom environment, or what's cool and comfortable to you versus it being hot and stuffy. I think it's important to kind of have this as an environment that's really going to be supportive of sleep, and using your sleep for just sleep activities instead of seeing your bed as this like miscellaneous space to do all the things. I think this sometimes applies more to the students that I talk about with this because their bed can often be where they sleep, where they study, where they binge watch Grey's Anatomy, where they're eating their ramen, where they're doing all the things, and so their brain isn't necessarily associating their bed with it being a place to sleep and relax, but it's just a multi-purpose activity space. But hopefully for us, we can primarily use our bed for sleep-based activities. So as we kind of wrap things up, again, we want to remember and consider and know and experience that sleep is going to be important for so many different areas of our physical and mental health. It's going to be playing a vital role in maintaining our overall health and well-being. It's going to restore our energy and our physical health. This is going to be playing a role in cellular repair and in our immune system, also in energy conservation. This is also going to assist with brain function and cognitive health, and that's going to include memory consolidation. I tell our students all the time that for those that are staying up late and they're having a cramming session for whatever they're working on, they really need to make sure that there's some sleep that's happening after that cramming session, after that study session, so that there's some memory consolidation from what they just read and what they just wrote. That's going to be extremely helpful there. When we think about cognitive function, that's going to enhance our focus and concentration and decision making. So when we have to perform the next day, we're actually on top of our game. Also, too, when we think about this from a brain detoxification lens, it's really going to allow our brain's lymphatic system to clear out waste products like beta amyloid, again, that protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. And so this brain detox, quote unquote, is really going to help with overall cognitive function. And so just keeping this in mind, I know we don't always actively think about the benefits of sleep other than just the ability to not feel tired throughout the day, but I'm hoping that this provides some motivation to think about your sleep quality, think about some of the foods that you can add to really enhance that sleep quality, as well as maybe some things that you're noticing in terms of different types of nutrients that you may be eating close to bedtime that could be phased out or just eaten a little bit earlier on in the day. Because again, as we think about Strive for Five and creating some very practical goals for yourself, I'm hopeful that some of the things from today's presentation you can really take away from and experiment with as it works for your particular lifestyle. Because I want to acknowledge that the experience is going to be different for all of us because we all are very busy, but that's going to be a different kind of busy for all of us. And so the last thing I want to do is make you feel overwhelmed with this information, but more so motivate you to cherry pick some things that could be helpful for you as you explore having better quality sleep. So with that said, I know we have a couple of minutes. Would love to take any questions, and be able to answer them. And if there's some questions that pop up that I want to get back to you with the best information possible, I may ask to do that. But I just really appreciate your time today, and I'm so grateful to my friends in wellness and work life for allowing me to present on this topic today.
Thank you. I've got a couple of notes that
Yeah,
I'm gonna save for later.
sure. Yes, absolutely.
Reminders I need to put into play.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. I see some questions. What if feeling hungry before bedtime, should we eat or drink a little bit? Yes, absolutely. You could have a small snack. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night if I'm hungry, and so I may have a little bit of a bedtime snack. You probably just wouldn't want it to be anything that's too high in fat or anything that would be overly spicy or just aggressive on the stomach. So something a little bit easier on the stomach, like some crackers, maybe a fruit that would not be problematic for you. Sometimes I have clients that talk about having a little bit of cheese before bed. That protein is going to help with satiety. And you do want to drink some water as well for hydration. The ideal situation would be to hydrate earlier on in the day because if you're hydrating right before bedtime, and I have been there because of my blood pressure medications, and then me